name is Jennifer Mills-Knutsen, and I'm the senior minister at the American International Church in London. We are a multiracial, multi-denominational, international congregation of folks drawn from across London and across the world. Prior to serving at the American International Church, I served a congregation in Indiana for the last 12 years, which is why I'm drawn into this work around resilience. While I was there, the community I served was hit by an EF4 tornado, which is the second strongest kind of tornado there is. And it hit across 5 different counties, more than a 40-mile swath. 11 people lost their lives and hundreds more lost their homes. There was even a school that was completely destroyed. And within my own congregation, we had one family whose home was lost in total. Everything was down to the concrete slab. And another family who rode out the storm inside their basement and felt the roof lift off of their 3-story home and fall back down on again. So one of the things that we realized that we were dealing with in the aftermath of the storm was people who had survived trauma. And so in addition to all the work that there was to be done with people to rebuild their homes, to launch their lives, people also had trauma that needed recovery. And as we talk about resilience, I want to talk today about spiritual and emotional resilience, how to heal and how to help people work back from living with trauma. And I have 3 pairings that I'd like to talk to you about, things that we learned in that process. The first pairing is that recovery is both spiritual and it is emotional. Now, I think especially in the business world, people are very comfortable talking about the emotional part of recovery. We know that in the aftermath of any kind of a tragic or traumatic incident, that having grief counselors or other counselors available to people when they return to work is an important ingredient in giving people the emotional support that they need. We know that talking to family and friends is a part of the healing. But what about this spiritual part of things? Spiritual crises arise in response to trauma because it raises questions about why things happen and what it all means. And I would advise that you want to have some plan or some strategy for people who are equipped to have those conversations. In the aftermath of the tornado, for example, the family in my church that lost everything down to the concrete slab found that the mailbox at the foot of their driveway was standing completely intact. And across the road, their neighbor's house was completely untouched. So does that mean that God was sending them some kind of a message? Does that mean that the universe had something to speak to them? Did that mean they needed to change in response to this environment? Those are spiritual questions that require a spiritual answer. The second pairing that I'd like to identify and speak into is the companion of both immediate and long-term. So in the immediate aftermath, we know that people might be grieving, they might be frightened, they might be anxious, they might be losing a sense of stability, and people will react with shock or anger or fear. They might have panic attacks, they might be worried about the future and other potential losses. But for many people, they find that the effects of having come through a traumatic experience don't show up until later, when things have calmed down, when everybody is headed back to work, when the weather is sunny again, and yet somebody posts a warning about an impending storm, when the weather on a particular day reminds them of the weather of that day, when they go to reach for an outfit in their wardrobe and realize they wore it on that day. Those things can take months to show up. Sometimes it shows up in really dramatic fashion with symptoms like PTSD, but more often for people with a great deal of resilience and health, it's normal to experience things like irritability or exhaustion, a sense of doom or anxiety. And one of the most important things that we offered and can offer is space for people to tell their stories. People needed a chance to talk about what happened that day. They didn't necessarily need formal counseling, although some people did, but they needed a space to bear witness to what they had encountered and what they had experienced. So even myself, in telling you my own story just a few minutes ago, I found all of the feelings coming up again. Now, they don't overwhelm me like they used to, but there's power in just telling and retelling that story again. So we had some opportunities with a crisis center in the original aftermath for the short term, where we went to the place where the government was providing immediate crisis support, and we had chaplains and counselors available for people to talk and tell their stories right away. But we also discovered that 6, 8, 9 months later, more people needed to tell their stories. And so we opened up opportunities for people to come together in small groups and just tell their tornado tales. And that mattered as well. They didn't need to be held, they didn't need to be counseled, they just needed to talk. And opening up that space to tell that story made a huge difference. The third pairing is also really important, and that is healing from trauma. Being resilient in the face of a tragedy is both individual and it is community. Again, we are very familiar with individual symptoms and individual issues, nightmares, anxiety attacks, flashbacks, the inability to focus, the inability to get over your grief or stop thinking about the incident and what it means to you. But there's also a wound and a breach in our sense of community and safety after an incident like this. And we found that as much as we could attend to people one-on-one, we also needed to tend to the collective. People had lost the opportunity to stop in at their favorite coffee shop every morning and chat with the barista. They had lost the ability to go to the local grocery store and know where things were and find them again. And we needed to find ways for the whole community to establish itself again. You would have thought that some of those things might have taken the place of formal memorials and maybe as a chaplain, I would say worship services. That's what we needed to do. In the end, we were coming up on the first anniversary of the tornado, and the town, we were hearing from people all over that what they really wanted was a parade. They really wanted to have everybody out in the streets that had been full of rubble and sticks and broken buildings and houses. They wanted people to be back out in those streets and roads, and they wanted to put the firefighters and the first responders out there and honor them. They wanted to have the children from the school, whose school had been leveled, come and show off that they had been learning throughout the course of this year. They wanted a celebration. Now, of course, there were moments that we paused for silence to remember those who'd lost their lives, those whose lives had been forever changed by injury or the loss of their home. But we also celebrated, because what we needed to be resilient was for people to be reminded that there would be hope again, that there would be community again, that there would be connectedness again. The places that they had gathered, the places that knit together the fabric of their community identity had been broken. And they needed those to happen again. So as you, in your own work and in your own life, think about planning for the worst eventuality, or even a smaller incident, I want you to keep in mind those three pairings. That recovery and resilience is both emotional and it is spiritual. It is both immediate and it is long-term. It is both individual and it is also communal. It requires a big picture to take in all of those components as you think it all through. If you take away nothing else from me on this day, if you carry with you those three pairings, those 6 words, and an encouragement, an urgency to take them into account as you plan, whether you're a business or a community organization or a local institution, these things will apply to you as well. There are resources out there that are available. I recommend the use of mental health first aid training among your staff. I recommend forming relationships with institutions like mine, local churches and faith centers, so that if something happens in the workplace, you've got people that you know in the neighborhood where you can direct your folks to go and see. To make friends with churches and counselors, to know what community spaces and resources are available that might be outside your own scope. Those things exist, and you'll want to know who they are and where they are and already be in relationship with them. Remember that you need to be thinking about resilience as both emotional and spiritual. You need to think about recovery as being both immediate and long-term. And you need to think about wholeness as being both individual and community. And if you attend to all 6 of those factors, you will find the path to resilience and rebounding and healing together.